Hello, everybody. It is time for Art in the AM. And this is, what is this, the week 3 of my word of the week for September. And September is all about art styles. So the first week, we talked about realistic. So I think the first week, I'm going to look at my list here. I think the first week was realistic. And then last week was natural. If you showed up last week, I talked about how to do a grid drawing. And this little viewfinder is what helped me to do the drawing of the lion that I've been using. So I have been using the same lion picture for all of these styles. And I did get the drawing added on there. So you can see the lines. What I did is I just drew the lines and the shapes that I saw inside the viewfinder. So if you look at this and think that it looks very challenging, most of the time faces, hands, faces, I would say, are probably the most intimidating, the most challenging thing that most people think of if they're going to draw or paint or create. Tell me if that's true for you. Like, are faces the most challenging thing? I think hands a lot of times are too, but faces, I feel like, because there are so many layers, dimensions, depth, like all of the different. So if you use a viewfinder and use the grid drawing, that was how I was able to get that into there. And I'm still going to do the pencil work. If you were watching last week, hi there, Sandy. Hi, Lori. And I think I saw Sue pop in there. If you were watching last week, my eyes were watering so bad. Like, I couldn't even really see what it was that I was doing. So I didn't finish. And honestly, after I got off the live video last week, I'll tell you here in a second what today's word is. If you didn't get my text message, if you got my text message that I was going live, you already know what it is. I ended up taking some allergy and sinus like medicine because that's what I thought it was like allergies. We had the windows open, it was beautiful, and I slept 2.5 hours. I never do that. I never take like even an hour nap in the middle of the day like that. So I took that and, I woke up still like, well, I was groggy for sure. And my eyes felt better. They were, just still. And we had the windows open that night too. And I woke up the next morning and my eyes weren't watering. So I started thinking about what was different. And I can laugh about this now, but last week I did not have my eyeliner that I normally use. I usually use Mary Kay eyeliners. They're my favorite. They're soft. They're just my favorite. If I never get any other Mary Kay stuff, it will be the eyeliner. And I didn't have it, and I had just ordered it. It wasn't due for a couple of days. So I used eyeshadow down here. And my eyeshadow that I used that day had, it was sparkly. You guys, I think the reason that my eyes were watering last week is because I got eyeshadow in my eyes. So I don't think it was allergies at all, but apparently I needed the sleep. And I can hardly take like those allergy medicines because they just make me tired. So that was last week. But so we did realistic, we did natural. And today I wanted to talk to you about a style that it's called by kind of a few different names, but I chose rustic. I don't know why I chose rustic, but I am curious what you think of when you think of a rustic art style. What do you think of when you think of rustic? And in particular with this lion, what you might think of when you think of rustic. I do plan on finishing the realistic and the natural, and I will probably do a end of the month little video of all of the different styles. I have abstract and impressionist coming up. So those are my 5 styles: realistic, natural, rustic, which is what we're doing today, abstract, and impressionist. And so while you're telling me about what you think of when you think of rustic, I'm going to take a drink. My voice is very hoarse this morning. And I will tell you some of the other, now I have like this little frog, some of the other names that I think of and kind of associate with rustic, and the artist that I usually think of when I think of rustic, or some of these other words that are kind of similar, that are all kind of like associated together. So when I think of rustic, honestly, I don't think of fine art. I don't think of paintings. I don't think of that word being used. So it's kind of interesting that I even chose that word anyway. But what I think of when I think of rustic is primitive, is folk art, is simple or simplified. I think of, Sandy thinks of like country, vintage. Yeah, I definitely think of those. And for the most part, I think of more like furniture, like rustic kind of furniture, vintage furniture, things like that. And I think of wood. Like really, that's what I think of when I think of rustic, is like wood furniture that is is more rustic. So Kathy says, does Grandma Moses, does she paint rustic? That is exactly who I think of when I think of primitive art or folk art and painting in a style of rustic. It's Grandma Moses. She didn't start painting until she was 78. And she, as far as I had ever read, had no training, no formal classes, like nothing like that taught her how to paint like an artist, right? And I put that like in little quotation marks because there are certain guidelines, the principles and elements of art, and there are ways that you can use those, and there are ways that are pleasing. But Grandma Moses kind of developed this whole style on her own, and it was based on her not really having any formal training. So today, what I'm going to do, I already have my line drawn on here, and I'm going to be doing the same lion face to go along with the realistic here, and then the natural one that I'm doing. And if you didn't watch last week, I used my friction pen. So after I get this all on here, I will use my little heat tool, and those grid lines will disappear. Coolest thing. So I'm going to use let me get on the right page here, my pencil to start with. And then I have a few colors of paint. And I am going to paint a little bit in just kind of a primitive type style, in a style that like Grandma Moses would have painted in. But I am going to draw it on here first. The other thing that I think of when I think of rustic, primitive, folk art is very simplified. And when I think of simplified, I think of how how we thought of things before the world taught us how we should draw fingers, how we should draw eyes, how we, and from observation, from, making it look more realistic. We had symbols. We had simplified ways of drawing things. And that's what I think of with Grandma Moses. She had this style that was very simplified that appealed to a lot of people because they could recognize it. They knew that they weren't realistic, but they were the symbols of the things that she painted, of the landscapes and things like that we recognize because they were the symbols of a house. This is what a house looks like. This is what a barn looks like. And it might not have been a realistic, but it was a simplified version that was very relatable to people. And I think that that was why it had so much appeal to it. So I'm going to go ahead, and now that I've told you about my eye watering and we talked all about rustic and everything, and I'm going to show you on this. I am going to be doing this upside down again, which I find actually kind of helpful. Did you see I'm wearing my Monday Lisa shirt there with her Hermes over here. But when I think of, and I think I'm gonna, let me move these things off to the right here, because I think what I'll do is have this over on this side, and then you can see what I'm doing over here. When I look at this, if I'm just gonna like simplify it, I think of the ear, right? I think of the head of the lion, kind of like the snout. Definitely the nose is just a triangle. If we're gonna just like simplify that nose, it's just a triangle, right? And then I think of this smile, you know, his mouth or whatever, and then the eye. So there's really, you know, in the ear in there, there's really just a few main like shapes that I would break down. This one is not about getting the right proportions necessarily. It's not about getting it placed in the right way. It's really just getting the idea of a lion. So I'm actually going to start with kind of the top fur, like is it the mane? Is that what you call like that top part? This is the mane, right? So I'm going to start kind of like with the mane, and I know that, you know, it starts over a little bit. And I'm just going to put kind of a stylized, simplified way of doing the mane. And then when I come down, I know that, like, here's the bottom of my paper. So I'll have a little bit of this. But that's kind of what I think of when I think of just, you know, it's just very simplified and just kind of this hair kind of going. And then I will do the ear. And just really simplified, maybe I'll just kind of do like, oh, I kind of like that like spiral. I might actually, oh, I kind of like that. So that's just like my little, I don't even know if you can see that because the pencil's not very dark. It's just like my little stylized ear there. And then I just have the mane. And then I would come down, and the snout here is kind of like this, kind of like blocky. You know, it's really the snout of all kinds of different like animals, you know, so it's just kind of like this, you know, a kid doesn't, oh, this curve needs to go here. They just like, okay, here's the nose. You know, they just like draw it on there. And for the eyeball, right, I will just kind of do just like a simplified little eye, and you have that little triangle for the pupil, right? And maybe for the bottom part of his lip, maybe that's his smile right there. That's his mouth, and then that's the bottom part. And then for the nose, I would just kind of go like right in there, and then I would have this line coming down. I feel like that needs to come, well, there needs to be like another line kind of like right in there, I feel like. But that's just like my little simplified, kind of looks like a ram with this curl for the ear there, but I still like that. I'm going to do a little bit of the fur kind of coming down in here. I might even paint it so there's kind of some coming over the eye there a little bit. And then I feel like there needs to be this other line. And I think I am going to have kind of this line for his mouth there, kind of like open. Might not have it quite so open like right in there. But, I mean, that's just like a really simplified, very rustic kind of lion, right? I have 4 colors that I thought that I would use. I definitely wanted to use some yellow. Pretty, you know, there's yellow in there. I have some white over here too. I might even like lighten it up so it's a little, you know, not quite as bright. I have some brown, right? Because if I look at it, I mean, there's brown, a little bit darker kind of brown in there. I might add a little bit of black. And then I have this brick red. So I will show you what I will do with that. And then I thought that I would just do some blue in the background. And I'm going to, I just had this line here to be able to kind of know where that is. But I don't think that I'm going to leave that there. I don't have my eraser over here though. I was looking to see if I had another eraser. Let me see, here we go. And I'm just going to paint this whole background kind of blue in there. And I just have like a little lid that I'm putting my paint in. I don't know what you use for your palette, but I use kind of whatever is around. Sometimes I will use a piece of paper. Oh, I think my paint is stuck in there. Sometimes I'll use an actual palette, you know, like I have. Sometimes I'll just use a piece of plastic. It's like whatever I have around. And this happened to be like right here. I will use those little foam. Have paint stuck in my, let's see if I can get that out of there. Well, we're just going to be taking the lid off. There we go. And then I think I am going to use some white. Because that's what you think of when you think of sky, right? Is like blue and white. And so I will just kind of pick up both of those kind of together. And I'm definitely going to have extra paint. I got like a lot of blue paint in there. And I'm just going to kind of come around like where the head of the lion is. And tell you, while I am painting this here, I just set up an event on my business page this morning that you may be interested in. It is happening this week. It is Thursday at 4:30 Eastern. So tell me, I'm on Eastern time, but I am going to be interviewing my friend Debbie, who is on Central time. And we are going to be talking all about hat burning. If you do not know about this just popular trend right now, this idea of burning your own hat, it is something that Debbie has become quite the expert in. And I thought, since that's not something that I do, I've had a lot of people, you know, ask me questions about it. And I just thought, well, I'm just going to get the expert, my go-to expert, Debbie, to come on and answer questions about hat burning. And she's going to tell us about her hat burning experience that is coming up. If you do not follow Debbie Hightower, she is with the Painting Junkie, and she Well, you just need to go over to her page because she has been doing some videos getting ready for this hat burning experience that is happening next week. And she's been doing these very entertaining videos. You just need to go watch them. I can't even describe because you just need to go watch them for yourself. I'm going to put a little bit of blue, even though I know a lion's eyes are not blue. I think I really want a blue eyeball for my lion. This brush is probably way too big for this, but I'm going to have a blue eyeball for my lion there. And that is my very simplified rustic sky for my lion. And then I'm going to use, I already have some white on here, so I'm going to use my yellow. And you can see, I think all of these are Craft Smart paints that I'm using. This one is dark yellow. And I think I'll use the same paintbrush. Mix that out. And if I look at the picture here, definitely his mane is yellow. And then around in his face and kind of underneath here is like a lighter yellow. So I'm going to paint kind of this bright yellow up in here. I'm going to be really careful not to get the sky where I just painted there. I'll have kind of green. So I'll come back and kind of fill in some of those in there. And then I'm going to come right up into this area. And the other thing that I kind of think of when I think of rustic, primitive, folk art is just kind of solid colors. You know, just laying down like a solid color. And now I'm going to go ahead and mix some white with it. And kind of come down into here. Got a little bit of there. And not having like a lot of dimension. I mean, Grandma Moses definitely had some, you know, variations in there, but that's what I think of mainly is just kind of solid colors. And maybe not realistic. And down underneath here. Be really careful that that blue is still kind of wet, so I don't want to get too far over into there. And I can kind of come back and clean that up a little bit. You know, so this eye has a lot of detail, a lot of dark kind of around in there. I don't even think that I'm going to add so many of those details in there. I'm just going to kind of keep it simple, and I'm kind of using the point of my paintbrush to kind of get into some of those areas in there. I know that this part has like the whiskers and everything, and it's a little bit darker, but I'm just going to keep it. And then it kind of comes over in here. It's a little bit darker, and I'm probably going to pick up my brown. And I would just, I think that blue is starting to dry a little bit. And every once in a while I'm kind of picking up some of the white just to give like a little bit different dimension in there, but really I'm just kind of keeping to the yellow, and then I'm going to come in with some brown. I just want like the variation between a light and a dark is really what I want. And I'm not going to use very much of the brown probably. Oh, let's make sure and shake that up. This one really needs to be shaken up. There we go. And then I will probably just use the brown for the nose, the nostril, the center of the eye, you know, all the places where it's a little bit darker. Now, this Craft Smart paint is not, you know, it's not the best paint, but for fur, it actually works pretty well because it's kind of thinner and it kind of shows the brush strokes, which makes it kind of look like fur. So I kind of like it for, and my paintbrush, since there's not very much paint on there, is kind of dry. So I'm kind of getting that dry brush look, which, you know, starts to look like fur. So I kind of like that. And then this is pretty light over here. I'm going to come over a little bit farther with the brown. Maybe more than it even shows in the picture there. That kind of makes it look like some of the fur. And then I could even, you know, come in, there is a little bit of darker kind of back in here on the mane. So I'll come in and do some of that with just that little bit of paint on there. So I got sidetracked doing the lion, and I think I didn't finish telling you about the hat burning. On Thursday at 4:30 Eastern, I'm going to interview Debbie, and there is an event, so you can go and mark going on the event. There is going to be a replay for 30 days on Facebook, but I am recording it onto YouTube. You can watch it over on YouTube, but that's where you can see the replay too. If you go and mark going on Facebook, you'll get a notification. If you mark going on YouTube, if you go over to my YouTube page and you mark that you want to get a notification, be notified, it'll send you a notification. And you can watch either place on Thursday. I can't think of what I was trying to say there. Okay, I'm going to paint in the snout, not the snout, the nose. And I will paint in the eyeball, the mouth. That get a little bit thinner in there. Might need a smaller paintbrush for the eye, but I'm going to try this one. Yeah, it was too thick there. Sometimes I don't like to switch out my brushes, so I just try to use what it is that I have. I can come back in with the blue and kind of clean that up a little bit. And then I feel like I want a lighter yellow in there. And up around his ears, I want a little bit of kind of some brown, a brownish yellow maybe. In the picture, this is kind of where the highlight is hitting, or the, oh, and I think that needs to be, I'm going to come back in and kind of angle that a little bit more with the blue once that's all dry. So I think I'll mix a little bit of the yellow and the brown and not have very much paint on my brush. And then I will come around, like I want more yellow in there. And with just a little bit of paint on there, it kind of makes it look like the, you know, the fur. And I will kind of fix up a little bit of that just to make that a little bit thinner kind of in there. But very different than the realistic, very different than the pencil version that I'm going to do for the natural. And just with those few basic things, you have the idea of a lion. The rustic is just very simplified. You don't need to blend a lot of colors. You don't need to really even use a lot of colors. And you can really simply get the idea of a lion. And I didn't trace anything. I didn't, you know, I have relatively the same size because I, you know, just drew the line of where the line of the paper was. So it's about the same size as this one. But I didn't trace anything. I didn't measure anything. There's not a, I don't think of rustic as being as, like you don't have to be as perfect with measurements and all of those things. As long as you have the essence, I guess that's the right word that I'm thinking of, the essence of what it is that you're trying to paint on there, that to me is what the rustic is all about, is just very simple. And it doesn't mean that you don't have some training, classes, education in art. Sometimes the styles that came up were because people did know those things, but they wanted to do something different. Like a lot of people see Picasso, and we'll talk a little bit with the abstract and the impressionism about how people, it's not that they didn't know how to draw realistically and how to make things look realistic. They wanted to do something different. So we'll definitely talk more about that next week and the last week of September when we talk about impressionism. But if you are wanting to do a rustic style, keep it all rustic, keep it all primitive and simplified, so that if someone's looking at it, they didn't think that you were just trying to, don't let anybody criticize your artwork, especially if you have a purpose. Like my purpose in this one was trying to paint in a primitive style. Someone could look at this and say, well, you didn't even put all the details. You didn't mix colors. You don't have the fur in there. You know, you don't have the lines. It's not realistic. But that wasn't my purpose. So don't let people try to judge your artwork, especially if you're very intentional on the purpose that you're trying to do. That's my encouragement for you today, is don't let other people judge your artwork. There you go. I have lots of extra paint, so I'm going to be using that probably in my extra papers and things that I do in my journal with extra paint. And actually I'll show you one of the ones that I had done. I had some extra pink paint. I had some extra white paint, and I've always looked at the front of this mixed media woman on here, and it was sitting on my table when I had that extra paint, and I thought, I wonder if I just use a couple of colors, if I could get something like that. And that was what this turned into. So there's my inspiration, and there's my girl there. But all of this back here was all of my extra paint, and you can definitely see. And I just kind of painted on the background, and then I started adding some colors and used that for inspiration. I'll post a picture of this. I have a few more things that I wanted to do, but I needed to let it dry when I get this one all finished, and I'll post it with the inspiration there. But what do you think about that one? I had a lot of fun with this one. I really like building up layers for faces, and I love how you can see the underneath of the hair, the texture in there, and the different colors that were in the background. So I will post about that. But that's what I'm going to use my extra paint for that I have in my little lid right there. So thank you for being here today and wanting to learn more about some different art styles and how you can be intentional with your artwork and experiment and play around with and learn some different art styles. So I will see you next week at 10:30 a.m. Eastern for the next art style, which is abstract. So show up next week if you want to learn about abstract art, and I'll see you then.